On a large space station, floating in the dark cold of space, thousands of people from many worlds lived and worked together. Some were human, some were alien, all of them moving through gray metal halls full of noise and light. But not all of them had homes or food or even voices. And in one corner of the station, a small group of alien refugees lived in silence. They had no money, no power, no family left. Many had lost their homes during wars or disasters. Their eyes empty, their shoulders heavy, their steps slow. They worked cleaning floors, fixing wires, carrying crates, doing whatever they could to survive. And among them, there was one young alien girl named Cellari. Cellari was quiet and thin. Her skin was soft purple, her eyes large, and dark, her hands small and shaking. She wore a torn gray robe that hung off her shoulders like old cloth. Her feet made little sound when she walked, and she never looked anyone in the eye. She stayed close to the walls and never spoke unless someone forced her to. And even then her voice was soft like wind behind a door. Each day when the food hall opened, Cellari came early and sat at the far end of the room alone. She always sat at the same table near the waste bin where no one else liked to sit. And every day she sat there without food, her hands on the table, her eyes fixed on the trays of hot meals moving past or carried by humans and aliens who never looked her way. Cellari had no credits, no ID, no voice that mattered in the station system. And so she never got food from the counters. She simply sat there waiting, hoping, smelling the meals, hearing the laughter, and sometimes watching pieces of bread or fruit fall to the floor, only to be cleaned up and thrown away by others. Many soldiers saw her sitting there, and many laughed. They gave her names like Ghost Girl or Space Rat. Some made jokes loud enough for her to hear. They pointed and laughed when her stomach growled, or when she sat with her head down. Some tossed crumbs her way, just to see if she would react. Others filmed short videos of her with their holopads, sharing them with friends, saying, "Look at the hungry alien girl, she thinks she belongs here." But Cellari never reacted. She never cried, never yelled, never begged. She only sat there, her eyes low, her mouth shut, her small frame still like a forgotten shadow. Among the soldiers was one human who never laughed. His name was Sergeant Tom Rivers. He was older than most, with short dark hair and quiet gray eyes. He did not speak much, and he ate alone near the edge of the hall where the light was softer and the noise did not reach so easily. Tom watched Cellari every day, not with anger, not with pity, but with something quieter, something deeper. He saw how she sat, he saw how she held her hands, he saw the way her eyes followed the food trays, but never looked at the people, and he saw how she flinched every time someone shouted near her table. He never spoke to her, and she never looked at him, but each day he saw the same thing, the same girl, the same hunger, the same cruelty from others, and the same silence that filled the air around her like thick smoke. Days turned to weeks, and the pattern stayed the same. Cellari came and sat with no food. The others mocked her, and Tom watched from afar, his face calm, but his chest heavy with thoughts he could not share with anyone else. Then one day something changed, something small but loud inside Tom, something that had been growing quietly over time like a storm behind glass. It was a busy lunch hour. The hall was full of soldiers and workers. The smell of hot stew filled the air. People laughed and talked and shouted across tables. Cellari sat at her usual spot, hands folded, eyes down, stomach empty as always. Then a piece of bread flew across the room and landed near her feet. Someone laughed and said, "Hey, Ghost Girl." Catch someone else threw a fruit rind at her tray. Another voice said, "Maybe she eats garbage, that's why she sits over there." Cellari did not move. Her hands stayed on the table, her eyes fixed on the same spot, but her fingers were shaking and her shoulders had sunk lower than ever before. That was the moment Tom stood up. His chair slid back across the floor, the sound cutting through the noise like a warning. The voices paused, heads turned, forks stopped in midair. Someone whispered, "What is he doing?" Tom picked up his tray slowly and walked toward the far table, the sound of his boots quiet but heavy. The eyes of the room followed every step. The laughter stopped, the jokes faded, and silence began to grow around him like a wave. Cellari looked up for the first time in days, her eyes wide, unsure, afraid, maybe thinking this was the worst joke, yet maybe expecting more crumbs, more cameras, more cruel names. But Tom said nothing at first. He reached the table and stood across from her, his face calm, his tray full, his voice soft and clear. "Come eat with me." The 5 words hung in the air like a stone in water, sending ripples across the room. No one spoke, No one moved, some blinked, some stared. One soldier gave a small laugh that died quickly under the silence. Cellari stared at Tom, her lips parted, her eyes blinking, her hands frozen. She had not heard those words in a long time, maybe never not spoken to her, not in kindness, not without price. Someone near the back said, "What's he doing feeding his pet now?" Another voice whispered, "He's lost it," but Tom did not turn his head, did not answer, did not leave. He pulled out a chair and waited. Cellari looked at him, then at the tray, then at the others, then back at him. Her hands slowly unclasped, and her body leaned forward just a little. She stood from her chair, so light she barely made a sound, and walked the few steps across the space between them, her eyes still wide, her breath slow and unsure. Tom stepped aside and let her sit. He placed the tray in front of her gently, and then sat across from her again, without a word, without a smile, without a speech. And for the first time in days or weeks, or maybe years, Cellari picked up a spoon and took a bite. The room stayed silent, the people watched, and something changed inside. That moment, something small, but deep, something that would not go away again. And in that silence, two souls sat at the same table and shared something more than food, something called dignity, something called kindness, something called courage in a world that had long forgotten all three. Cellari sat across from Tom, with the tray of food in front of her, her hands still shaking, just a little, her eyes locked on the warm meal. She had not touched real food in what felt like forever. Her breath was slow, careful, like the wrong move might break the moment and send her back into the cold space of hunger and shame again. She picked up the spoon slowly, her fingers wrapping around the handle like it was a treasure from a dream, and she took a small bite. Her mouth moved gently as she tasted the soft warmth of the soup. Her eyes closed for just a second, and then she opened them again to see if this was still real. It was, and she kept eating each spoonful steady, as if each one mattered more than the last. Tom said nothing. He watched quietly, his own meal untouched for the moment, his face calm, not smiling, not cold, just present like a mountain in a storm, strong and unmoving. He glanced at the people still staring from other tables, their voices low, their eyes full of questions and judgment. But he did not care about that, not now, not here, not with Cellari sitting across from him, trying to remember what kindness tasted like. Cellari's hand stopped shaking after the fourth bite, and she looked up just a little. Her eyes met his for the first time, not long, not deep, but enough to feel something safe, something human, even if she was not one of them. She took another sip of the fruit drink, her face twitching at the sudden sweet taste like a spark of sunlight in a dark cave, and for the first time in many days, she let out a small breath that almost sounded like a sigh, but not one of pain. It was soft and full of something else, maybe relief, maybe hope. Tom finally picked up his fork and started to eat beside her, not across like a guard, not behind like a shadow, but beside like an equal, like a friend, though the word had not yet formed in either of their minds. And for a while they sat like that, two souls at a steel table in a room full of noise that no longer mattered. People kept watching, some whispering, some frowning, some laughing under their breath. A few even recorded the scene on their devices, not with honor, not with care, but to share later as a joke, maybe post on the message walls with titles like "Soldier Feeds Space Rat" or "Ghost Girl Eats Like a Pet." But Tom ignored it all, and Cellari did not seem to notice. She was too busy feeling what real food did to her heart and stomach at the same time. After several minutes, she spoke, her voice small, unsure, like a bird testing its wings for the first time, her eyes still on the tray, as she asked, "Why did you do this? Why me?" Tom paused with his fork halfway to his mouth and lowered it, his eyes calm, as he answered, "Because you were hungry and no one else cared, because it was wrong to watch and do nothing, because I could not keep pretending I did not see you." Cellari stared at him, not blinking, not smiling, just looking at his face like it was a riddle she had never seen before, a puzzle she was afraid to touch. Then she nodded, once not a big nod, just a little one like a leaf moving in the wind, and she returned to her meal in silence. They finished eating and stood from the table. Tom took her tray and carried it to the return station without a word. And when he came back, she was still there, standing with her hands held together, looking down, but not shaking, not now, not anymore. He nodded once and walked away, not looking back, not rushing, not making a show of it, just walking like a man who had done the right thing, even if no one clapped, even if no one thanked him. Cellari watched him go, her heart beating slow and strange, a feeling in her chest she could not name, not Yet something soft, something strong, something that made her want to follow not with her feet, but with her will, with her spirit that had been tired for so long. That night in her sleeping pod, she sat with her back against the wall, her fingers touching the spot on the tray where her spoon had rested, remembering the taste, the warmth, the feeling of sitting with someone who did not laugh, who did not mock, who saw her not as a thing, not as a ghost, but as someone worth sharing a meal with. She did not sleep quickly, her mind full of colors and sounds and thoughts that had not visited her in many days, but when sleep did come, it came gently like a blanket, like a whisper in the dark, and she dreamed not of running, not of hiding, but of sitting at a table with warm food and kind eyes. The next day, the food hall was busy again, voices, loud trays, full laughter bouncing off the walls. Cellari walked in slower than before, but not from fear. Her steps still quiet, her head still low, but her eyes looking toward one table near the edge of the room. Tom was there already, sitting alone again, with two trays in front of him, one full, one untouched, his eyes scanning the room. Without urgency, his hands resting on the table, like he was waiting not just for food, but for something more, something that mattered more than credits or ranks or rules. Cellari paused at the entrance, some eyes turned to her. Already some soldiers whispered again, some aliens frowned, but she did not stop. She walked to the table, her steps steady, her breath calm. And when she reached him, she sat without a word, just sat, as if she had always belonged there, and Tom slid the second tray toward her without speaking. They ate in silence again, not the silence of shame or fear, but the silence of peace, the silence of healing. Two strangers from different stars, sharing something no one else could understand, something that no camera could capture, something that began with food, but would soon grow into something far more powerful. And the station kept moving around them, busy, loud, cold. But at one table, a new story had begun, a quiet story, a brave story, one that would soon reach ears and hearts far beyond those gray metal walls. Cellari came to the food hall each day, now always at the same time, always quiet, but not as afraid as before. Her steps were still light, her eyes still cautious, but her back stood straighter, her hands shook less, and her face held something new, something soft and unsure, but real. Tom was always there too, waiting at the same table, with two trays, one for him and one for her. He never spoke first, and he never asked questions. He just sat and listened to the silence between them as they ate together, and that silence was not empty. It was full of meaning, full of quiet respect, full of things words could not carry. They sat in the same way every time, eating in silence, sometimes glancing at each other, sometimes not, but always sharing a space that was once full of mocking and now full of peace. The others around them still whispered, still stared, but fewer laughed, fewer pointed, and fewer dared to throw crumbs or speak names that were meant to hurt. Tom had always watched her from afar before, but now he saw more than just her hunger. He saw the way she chewed slowly, as if learning to trust the food. He saw how she looked around before each bite, making sure no one would steal it from her. He saw how she touched her cup gently, like it might vanish if she blinked. He also saw the sadness behind her eyes, not loud, not angry, but deep, like a story written in shadows, and pain, a story that no one had asked to hear and no one had wanted to see until now. One day, after many quiet meals, Cellari looked up from her tray and met his eyes for longer than usual. She took a breath, then another, then asked something she had held inside for days. "Do you want to know why I came here?" Tom paused, then nodded once, and set his spoon down, his eyes steady, his hands. Still he did not speak, he just listened. Cellari looked down at her fingers, pressed them together, then began to speak slowly, carefully, as if lifting each word from a place that had been locked away for a long time. "I was not always like this," she said. "I had a family, once a father, who worked with the High Council on our home planet. He was a speaker, a peace builder. He wanted to stop the fighting between our kind and yours. He thought words could change the stars. He thought peace was stronger than fear." Tom listened without blinking, without moving. He could hear the weight in her voice, the sorrow wrapped in memory. "My father invited human leaders to our world," she said. "He opened talks, he opened doors, and some followed, some listened, but others did not want peace. They wanted war, they wanted power and secrets and blood. They betrayed him. They said he had sold our people to the enemy." Her hands clenched together, her voice cracked, but she kept going. "They killed him," she said, "in front of me. They came in the night and set fire to our home. They said he was a traitor. They said we were nothing. They called me a curse, and I ran." Tom leaned forward slightly, not to interrupt, not to question, but to show he was there with her, not just in body, but in spirit. I hit on a ship full of fleeing families. She said we were supposed to reach a safe world, but pirates came, they took everything, food, water, fuel, people. I escaped again, found another ship, then another, each time losing more of myself, until I came here with nothing, no name, no food, no one. She looked up again, her eyes wet, but not crying, her voice soft but strong. And then I met you, she said. You gave me food, yes, but you also gave me something else. You gave me a place to sit, a place to breathe, a place to remember who I was. Tom nodded slowly, his heart heavy with what he had heard. He had seen loss before, seen pain, seen war. But something about her story felt different, maybe because she had never raised her voice, never asked for help, never expected kindness, but still survived. He reached into his pocket and placed a small badge on the table. Between them, it was silver with a blue symbol, the mark of the Human Peace Corps, not given to soldiers, not given to fighters, but to those who served during missions of aid and unity. My brother wore this. He said he died trying to protect a refugee camp far from here. He believed people were worth saving, even when the world said otherwise. I think he would have wanted you to have this. Salari looked at the badge, then at Tom. Her lips parted, but no words came. She picked it up gently, held it in both hands like it was something sacred, something holy. Then she nodded slowly, not with fear, not with sorrow, but with something else, something that almost looked like strength. They finished their meal in silence. But this silence was different. It was no longer made of caution or pain. It was made of shared truth, of respect, of something bigger than both of them. Salari stood first and bowed her head to Tom before leaving, her steps soft but sure, her fingers still wrapped around the badge. And as she walked away, the lights of the station flickered above her like stars blinking in approval. Tom sat at the table, watching her go, not with sadness, but with quiet pride. He knew the world around them would not change overnight. He knew there would be more whispers, more walls, more rules. But he also knew that something had begun, something strong, something real, something no one could take back. And in the space where laughter once mocked and cameras once mocked, now sat a table where two people had shared more than food. They had shared truth and trust and the first piece of something called healing. And it was only the beginning. Ask ChatGPT. The days moved slowly on the station. The lights never changed. The air always smelled the same. The sounds of machines and boots echoed through the halls like clockwork, each shift blending into the next. But something had changed for Salari and Tom, and people began to notice. Every day, Salari joined Tom in the food hall, sitting at his table, eating the meal. He brought her not a word spoken at first, just quiet peace and steady hands, the two of them side by side in a space that once held only cold silence, now held warmth, and eyes that once looked down on her now stared with something different, something that looked like fear. The whispers began to grow louder, not from strangers anymore, but from those in uniform, soldiers in dark armor, with heavy boots and sharper tongues. They did not like what they saw. They called it strange. They called it soft. Some called it betrayal. One soldier named Cray, who wore medals on his chest and carried anger in his voice, pointed at Tom during lunch and said, "He is feeding the enemy. Why should we trust her? What if she is a spy? What if she is gathering intel while we give her soup and kindness?" Another one, a younger woman with cruel eyes, laughed and said, "Maybe he has a thing for aliens. Maybe he wants to marry her and live on her broken planet." The laughter rose again, but not like before this time. It was forced, sharp, like metal grinding against metal, and Tom did not answer. He kept eating, kept sitting beside Salari's face, still, his posture calm, but inside his thoughts were shifting. Later that week, Tom was called into a small room deep inside the command sector. The walls were white, the table metal, the air colder than the hall outside. And across from him sat Commander Hale, a man known for his silence and his strict orders. Commander Hale folded his hands and looked at Tom, without blinking, his voice low and flat when he spoke. "I heard about your new friend," he said, "the alien girl, the one you feed. Every day people are talking, and I want to know why you're doing this." Tom sat straight, his hands on the table, his eyes on the wall behind the commander as he answered. "Because she is hungry, because she has done nothing wrong, because I believe in showing decency even when others forget how." The commander narrowed his eyes and leaned forward just a little, his voice colder now. "We're not here to play hero, Tom," he said. "We are here to keep peace and follow rules, and the rules say that non-registered aliens do not get station resources unless approved, and you're giving her food without clearance, which breaks 3 regulations, maybe more. Tom did not blink, did not flinch. He looked the commander in the eye and spoke again, slower this time, but with fire behind the calm. Sometimes rules need to break before people do, and if kindness is a crime, then maybe we are all in the wrong business. The silence that followed was sharp like glass waiting to cut, and after a long pause the commander said one more thing. "You are one of the best we have, Tom, and that is the only reason I am not writing this up. But understand this, if you keep doing what you are doing and it causes trouble, I will not stop the fallout and you will stand alone." Tom stood up without another word and left the room, his steps, even his breath steady, but his mind heavy. Back in the lower deck, Cellari felt a shift in the air. She had seen Tom enter the command wing, and she had waited near the corridor hidden behind the corner like a shadow watching him walk in, and now she watched him come out, his face unreadable, but his pace a little slower than before. She followed him at a distance back to the food hall, where they sat once more at the same table this time, not speaking at all, not eating, as fast, both of them quiet, not with peace, but with weight between them. Cellari looked around and saw the stares sharper than before, more like knives than questions. She saw the holopads recording from behind cups and trays, and she saw Cray smirking at another table, whispering to a small group of soldiers who all looked her way with eyes like cold fire. Later that night, while walking through the maintenance corridor near her sleeping pod, Cellari heard footsteps behind her, slow and careful, but not soft enough to hide. She turned and saw 3 alien workers stepping from the shadows, 2 tall, 1 broad, all wearing worn boots and blank expressions. One of them spoke, low and firm. "Think you're special now, ghost girl eating with a human think. That makes you one of them. Think it makes you safe." Cellari said nothing. She took 1 small step back, and the broad one laughed. "He is not going to protect you forever," he said. "One day he will leave, and you will be back where you started, except this time we will not look away." They stepped closer but stopped when another sound filled the hall, heavy boots, strong voice, sharp as a blade. "Try it, and I will make sure you regret it." It was Tom, standing at the end of the corridor, hands at his side. No weapon, just a stare that could cut steel. The aliens paused, looked at each other, then backed away, melting into the shadows without another word. Cellari turned to Tom, her lips parting, but no words came. He walked to her side and waited for a moment, then walked her back to her pod, without speaking, the silence between them full of warning and care and something deeper than fear. Inside her pod, Cellari sat on the floor, her knees pulled close, her hands holding the silver badge Tom had given her. She looked at it and remembered her father, remembered fire and loss and escape, and now this station, and now this human. Outside the pod, Tom leaned against the wall, eyes closed for a moment, before walking away again, not fast, not loud, just steady like a man, carrying something no one else could see. And all across the station the story was changing, shifting, turning, growing louder in corners and in whispers, and though no one said it yet, trouble was rising like a storm waiting to break. Ask ChatGPT. The alarms came in the middle of the second sleep cycle, when most of the station was dark and silent. The lights above turned red and spun slowly, casting long shadows across the metal halls as the voice of the security system echoed through every corridor. Fire alert level 3, sector 9. All personnel evacuate and report. Cellari woke to the noise, her eyes wide, her body frozen for a second. Then she jumped from her small bed and ran barefoot into the hall, already filled with the sound of boots and shouting. She smelled smoke in the air, not strong, but real and growing. Tom was already moving fast from his unit 2 decks above, taking the stairwell 3 steps at a time, wearing only his undershirt and pants, his sidearm strapped at his leg, his mind racing toward one place, sector 9, where Cellari lived. The smoke grew thicker as he got closer. The fire suppression system sprayed cold foam through the ceiling vents, but something was wrong. The foam hissed and faded too fast, and the heat pressed down like a heavy hand. He saw sparks ahead, then flames reaching from a broken vent near the floor, licking the walls like hungry mouths. People ran past him, some with masks, some coughing, none with answers, and Tom kept moving until he reached the hallway just outside Cellari's pod and stopped. Her door was jammed, thick smoke pouring from the cracks. He shouted her name, pounded the metal with both fists, then stepped back and slammed his shoulder into it again and again until the lock snapped and the door gave way. Inside, the heat was worse. Her small mattress, already burning, her few things melted and broken. And there in the corner, crouched low, with celery eyes, shut arms over her head, the silver badge clutched to her chest. Tom grabbed her, pulled her to her feet, and wrapped his arm around her waist, leading her out as fast as he could through the fire, through the smoke, through the chaos, without a word, only focus, only speed. They burst into the hallway together, and another officer ran to help, spraying a foam line across the floor, clearing a path through the heat. Tom and Cellari stumbled through, coughing and sweating, but alive. Medics arrived moments later, taking her to the infirmary for burns and breathing scans, while Tom stood outside, watching the flames die down, watching the smoke crawl along the ceiling, watching the crowd gather with wide eyes and whispered voices. Commander Hale came not long after, his face tight, his voice colder than ever, when he pulled Tom aside and spoke in a low, firm tone. "We found signs of a bomb," he said, "homemade, small, but designed to burn through vents and seal. Someone wanted that room destroyed, and someone wanted her gone." Tom nodded, once not surprised, not confused, just angry, a quiet, slow, burning anger that did not shake or shout, but grew deeper with every word he heard. Later in the infirmary, Cellari lay on a clean bed, her arm bandaged, her eyes staring at the ceiling, not blinking, not speaking, until she saw Tom step inside, and then her lips moved. "I smelled it," she said, "before the alarm. Something sharp, something wrong. I knew it was not just smoke." Tom sat beside her, his hands resting on his knees, his face calm but watchful, and he asked the question already heavy in his mind. "Do you think it was them?" Cellari did not answer at first. Then she nodded, slow and small, her voice like ash. "They warned me in the hall that night, the ones who hate me, the ones who said I would be alone again." Tom stood and walked to the window, looked out at the stars beyond the glass, then back at her, his voice steady. "You are not alone," he said. "Not now, not ever again." Word spread fast across the station, news of the fire, news of the girl who almost died, news of the soldier who broke down a door with his shoulder and pulled her out before the flames could take her completely. And with the news came silence, the kind of silence that sits heavy on the air. People began to shift in how they looked at her. Not all, not most, but some. They started to turn their heads when she passed instead of laugh. Some cleared space at tables, some nodded without speaking, and a few even brought her food without saying why. Tom noticed it all, but said nothing. He stayed close, watched her pod, watched the halls, watched the faces of the soldiers who once mocked and now kept their distance. Commander Hale called them in again, this time his voice less sharp, more tired, and he placed a file on the table between them filled with reports and photos and warnings. "You are drawing attention, Tom," he said, "good and bad. Both. Some say you are right, some say you are foolish, and some want her gone more than ever." Tom looked at the file, then at Hale, and said the only thing that mattered. "Then let them try again, and I will be ready." Cellari spent her nights now with a new lock on her pod and a new sensor that sent alerts straight to Tom's datapad, and every morning they still sat at the same table, shared the same quiet meals, with more people watching and fewer people laughing. But something new had begun to change, not loud, not sudden, but slow and deep like roots growing under stone. People who once turned away now looked with different eyes, and some started to ask questions, some started to wonder if maybe kindness was not weakness, if maybe one meal could change more than a stomach. Cellari looked stronger each day, her voice less afraid, her steps more sure, and when she walked beside Tom down the hall past the burnt walls still black with ash, the whispers fell away and the space around them opened wide. The fire had not broken her, it had revealed her, and though danger still waited, though hatred still whispered from dark corners, she walked forward anyway, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as someone seen, someone known, someone who had survived. And Tom walked beside her, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as a man who chose to stand still when others turned and to hold a line others let fall. And the station, though still cold, though still filled with rules and walls, was not quite the same anymore, because in one small corner of it something had burned and something had lived. Ask ChatGPT. The days after the fire moved slower than before, like the station itself held its breath. The scent of smoke still lingered in the metal walls, and each time the lights flickered, people paused their steps and looked up just a little longer than usual, as if waiting for something worse to come. Cellari stayed quiet, as always, but something inside her had changed. Her shoulders no longer curled and her eyes no longer darted with fear. She moved through the halls like someone who had already been burned and found herself still standing. She wore a simple jacket, now not to hide, but because it made her feel human. And when she passed people, they still stared, but fewer looked away. Tom watched her from near and far, always alert, always ready, his boots, never too loud, his gaze steady, and his mind heavy with thoughts. He had not spoken to anyone about what the commander said in their last meeting, not even Cellari, but the words still echoed in his head. Someone are gone more than ever, and he knew what that meant. Cray had returned from patrol 2 days after the fire. His armor scratched, his eyes darker than usual. He looked at Tom across the training yard, but said nothing, just smirked like he knew a joke. No one else understood. The other soldiers stood in small circles, more quiet, more tense, and though no one spoke aloud, everyone knew something was coming. Late one cycle, Tom was in the small gym, lifting old metal weights, when a young recruit stepped in with eyes wide and voice shaky. He said, "There is something strange near the refugee quarters. A man with a hood, no ID, no reason to be there," and Tom dropped the weights without a word and ran. He found the hooded figure near the old ventilation shaft past the sleeping quarters, moving slow with a scanner in one hand and wires in the other. Tom drew his sidearm and shouted to stop, but the figure ran fast, slipping through a narrow pipe before backup arrived. The scanner left behind still blinking red. Security ran scans and found nothing conclusive. The wires looked harmless, the scanner just old tech. But Tom saw the pattern. It was not a bomb, not this time. It was a message. It was someone saying they could get close anytime they wanted, and Cellari was still a target. That night, Tom sat outside her pod, arms crossed back against the wall, while Cellari sat inside, reading from a small tablet. He gave her stories about stars, about old Earth myths, about heroes who were not strong but kind, and about creatures who found families in places they never expected. He heard soft music from her speakers, not loud, just enough to feel real, and he closed his eyes for a second, letting the sound take the edge off the fear growing in his chest. But elsewhere on the station, in the dim light of the lower engine levels, 3 men stood in shadow, speaking low and fast, their voices cold and full of purpose. Cray stood in the middle, a datapad in his hand, and on the screen was Cellari's picture, tagged and marked and surrounded by notes. "She is just the start," he whispered. "They let one in soon. There will be more. We are supposed to protect this place, not turn it into another refugee camp." One of the others asked, "What about Tom?" And Cray laughed, not loud, just enough to chill the air. "He made his choice," he said, "and soon he will feel what that choice costs." The next day, Cellari walked into the food hall alone. Tom was on patrol in the upper decks, and she had told him she would be fine, that people were not laughing anymore, that she could walk without fear. But as she sat down with her tray, she felt the old eyes again, not mocking this time, but sharp and waiting. Cray sat 3 tables away, not eating, just watching, and when she looked up, he smiled and tapped his fingers once, twice, 3 times, a strange signal she did not understand, and then he stood and walked out. Cellari felt something cold move down her spine. Her hand shook, but she stayed seated, trying to breathe, trying to remember the stories, trying to feel brave like the heroes on her tablet. That night, when Tom returned, she told him everything, the strange signal, the stare, the way the room felt wrong, and he nodded once and said no more walking alone from now on. He met with Commander Hale. The next cycle demanded protection, demanded cameras, demanded action, but Hale only raised his brow and said, "We have no proof. We cannot punish shadows," and Tom left that office with fire in his blood. So he made his own plan, a simple one, but strong. He would stay by Cellari's side every moment he could, and when he could not, he would leave her with others. He trusted old friends, not many, but enough, and he taught her too how to spot danger, how to run, how to speak into the hidden mic he gave her tucked into her jacket collar. Cellari trained with him in quiet places, learning to block, learning to strike, just enough to escape, never to harm, just to survive, and each time she hit the padded target, Tom smiled, not because it was strong, but because it was brave. One cycle later, the alarms rang again, not fire this time, but breach, unknown code, detected on subdeck 3, and Tom was already running before the alert finished. Cellari not far behind him, despite his order to stay back. They reached the subdeck and found the door ajar, wires cut, access pad fried, and inside a single case left open with a data drive inside, blinking red. Tom grabbed a call for text to scan and stood guard while they worked. The results came back fast. It was a virus meant to shut down power to the refugee quarter, open airlock, stop heat and light all at once, silent and deadly, and aimed at one girl's section first. Tom held the drive in his hand and stared at it, and then at Cellari, who stood beside him, without fear, her hand near his, but not touching, and he knew then this was not over, not close. Cray had not struck, yet not fully, but his hand was behind this, and others too, hiding in shadows, planning more, and waiting, and Tom was tired of waiting. So that night he met with the old guards, the ones who knew what the badge on Cellari's chest meant, the ones who still wore honor like armor, and he spoke to them not like a soldier, but like a man with something worth protecting. And they listened, and they nodded, and they said they would stand too. The war had not started yet, but everyone felt it now, a cold wind moving through the warm halls of the station. And at its center stood a girl who once starved in silence, and a soldier who once watched from afar, now walking side by side into whatever came next. Asked ChatGPT. The day began with quiet light, rising over the artificial sky panels of the station, casting a soft golden hue over the metallic floors, and sleeping halls. People stirred slowly, machines hummed like morning birds, and the world above the planet turned once more, as if untouched by the storms hiding within its walls. Cellari stood at the window of her small room, her reflection faint against the glow, her thoughts heavy, but still she held herself straight like she had learned to do over the last weeks. Her eyes scanned the people walking below, the mix of species and uniforms moving with routine and purpose. She was no longer invisible, and that meant both danger and duty. Tom Rivers waited outside her door, not in armor, not in command, just there in silence, his presence like a shield, his mind sharper than ever. He knew today would change everything, not just for her, but for them all. The pressure inside the station had grown like a fault line stretching across the steel and glass. Something had to shift, and soon it would. They walked side by side past the mess hall, past the old gym, past the wall where the names of the lost were carved in steel. Soldiers and civilians, humans and aliens, all remembered in the same way, equal in death, even if not always in life. The central chamber was filled when they arrived, seats arranged in a wide circle, lights dimmed to a calm white, and translators humming gently around the room. Commanders, engineers, diplomats, refugee soldiers, and even children watched from above, behind secure glass. No one spoke, yet not until the captain arrived, and when he did, the air seemed to pause. Commander Hale entered with slow steps, his uniform pressed sharp, his expression unreadable. He looked at Tom, then Cellari, then at the people around him, and finally he spoke without raising his voice, but with weight in every word. Today, we listen, today we decide. Cellari stepped forward, her tablet in hand, but she did not read from it. Instead, she looked up and spoke her own words, voice steady though quiet. She told them her name, her true name, her family name, the one she had hidden to stay alive, daughter of Roland Zeely, ambassador of the Varellan Accord, last speaker before the fall. She told them how her father had died, trying to prevent war, how he had begged both sides to see the danger and fear, and how those who profited from fear had silenced him and then hunted her like a loose and they failed to cut. She told them how she starved not by chance, but by design, how someone on this station tried more than once to finish the job, and how she had lived not by strength or power, but by kindness, by one voice that said, "Come eat with me," when everyone else laughed. She looked at Tom and then back to the circle, and she said the humans are not monsters, but neither are they all heroes, and the same is true for her kind. She said peace does not begin in treaties or great speeches, it begins in small moments when someone chooses to care. The silence after her words felt longer than the speech itself, and then someone clapped softly, an older human diplomat, followed by a Varellan elder. Then more hands joined until the chamber echoed, not with orders or threats, but with simple human applause and quiet alien gestures of respect. Cray watched from a monitor down below, surrounded by shadows, the others with him, shifting uneasy. Their plan was slipping their control, fading. They had hoped fear would win, they had hoped division would grow, but now the girl they mocked was speaking truth in front of everyone, and that truth was a stronger weapon than any data drive or fire. Later that day, the mess hall was full not just with soldiers, but with workers, techs, refugees, and even off-duty officers. Salari sat at the center not alone, but surrounded by people sharing stories, food, music, some cautious, others open, but all curious, all watching and listening. Tom sat beside her, a cup of warm broth in his hand, the same kind he first offered her weeks ago. He leaned back, smiling at something. She said a joke about Varellan bread being too dry, even for humans, and the table laughed not at her, but with her. Outside, the hall changes began. People moved Salari to better quarters, gave her a voice in meetings, gave her space to speak and space to breathe. Tom was assigned as her official guardian, not just for her safety, but as a sign that trust was possible between their species. The captain approved investigations into the sabotage acts. More arrests followed, including a technician linked to Cray, but Cray himself vanished before he could be caught, leaving behind only empty bunks and erased logs. Rumors spread that he escaped on a freighter bound for a distant sector. Others said he was still aboard, hiding, waiting, but Tom knew that if Cray ever returned, he would be ready, this time with more than just fists or files. He would have allies and eyes everywhere. Weeks turned into months, and the station began to shift. More joint patrols, more mixed teams, shared meals became normal. Laughter no longer cruel, but real. The line between human and alien still existed, but it no longer felt like a wall now. It was more like a bridge. Salari started writing again, not in secret, but for the station newsletter. Her words, simple, clear stories from her home, songs of stars, poems about hunger and hope and healing. Tom kept every one of them printed, folded in his jacket like small shields against old shadows. And one day, during a quiet hour, Salari returned to the same bench where she once sat alone, where she had been mocked, starved, forgotten. She placed a small plate there with warm bread and fruit, and wrote a single note beside it. "If you're hungry, sit with me." And someone did not right away, but they did eventually, because kindness has a way of coming back, just like silence once ruled that room. Laughter and welcome ruled it, now not because of war or orders, but because one girl dared to speak and one human dared to listen. And so the table was never empty again. Ask ChatGPT.